is there a 0-team scenario here? Is it possible that the Big 12 could wind up with a 0-team scenario here, or the ACC? That possibility does exist. I think it is very small, but that possibility does exist. And probably the more realistic thing to be talking about is, can you make sure that the Big 12 and or ACC champion finishes ahead of Boise State so that you still get one of the buys? And it's crazy how much the conversation has changed and how much one outcome of one game or two outcomes of two games can really do that to you. But that is what's happening. Both leagues are really beating each other up. Now, so is the SEC, by the way. I would mention that. Georgia beats Tennessee. So now you've just got this big smattering of SEC teams that have 2 losses. So as I said in a video, maybe like a month ago, you can go find it on the channel, that the SEC and the Big 10, or the Big 12 rather, are basically the same channel. The SEC's got a much better PR guy, but they're basically the same conference. They're basically the same conference, because you just have a bunch of teams that are kind of beating each other up, and it doesn't look like there are any truly great teams there. That's really the theme just across college football this year, which should make for a really exciting playoff. Unfortunately, it would have been a great year for the Big 12 to really have one truly dominant great team that could try to go run through that. Maybe Colorado is evolving into that. Maybe. We will see. I certainly think Colorado is playing like the best team in the league right now. And that's part of why we saw BYU's luck run out. That's really how that felt, man. At least I thought so. It felt like it was a luck run out situation for the Cougars. If you keep playing with fire, you're going to get burned. That's an adage basically as old as time, and it's what happened to BYU here. Played with fire against Oklahoma State, a team that is still winless in the Big 12, and you didn't quite get beat. But then you play with fire again last week at Utah, and a holding call, I wouldn't say bailed you out, because it does, as was plentifully discussed last week, it does look like that was a hold, or at very, very best, from Utah's perspective, like a 50-50 call. But you got a call that helps you late in a game, and you drive down and you still win. That was a game in which, BYU's offense didn't get it done nearly enough. Ever since the middle of the UCF game, the BYU's offense has been very anemic, very, very anemic. And that trend continued. And so against Utah, you almost got burned with it. This time you don't score enough against Kansas. You get 13 points. It's not going to be enough. This time you got burned. Kept touching the stove, kept hurting, but this time you really, truly hurt yourself. So was it a fluky play that kind of like flipped things in this game? For sure. I mean, Kansas basically, let me see if I can get this camera refocused for you guys. Sorry. Basically, a fluky play wins the game. You have the little quick kick from Jalen Daniels. It hits somebody in the helmet, and it turns into the game-winning touchdown for the Jayhawks. Is that a fluky play in and of itself? Yes, absolutely it is. I would not deny that really for a second. But I can't have a whole heck of a lot of sympathy when, again, you should have learned this lesson before. You can't be messing around with these teams that are below you in the Big 12 standings. I'm not going to call Kansas a bad team, because they are absolutely not at all right now. But you can't keep messing around with teams like that and expect to be able to pull it out of the fire every week. And it didn't happen. Finally, that stopped, and you weren't able to do it. Lots of reasons why, lots of frustrations. I hate the speed option call on 3rd and 6, right? Or 3rd and goal. Was it like 3rd and goal from the 6? Anyway, the 3rd down call for BYU there, where they run speed option at the end of the game. I did not like that in any way, shape, or form. I definitely didn't like the interception thrown into the end zone right at the end of the first half. That was a total backbreaker. I'm not really like a huge fan of just to lob it up in that sort of situation around the goal line. People really hate the goal line fade. I'm not the biggest fan in the world of it, except in very specific situations. I really wasn't there. But it is what it is, especially with, and like, nothing against Jake Retzlaff. He's been a phenomenal story and obviously a much better quarterback than most people expected this year. But man, that's not the type of guy that I would really want to be throwing the one-on-one ball to in the end zone in such a clutch situation like that. So I don't know. You can always go back and relitigate a lot of these things, but if I were a BYU fan, I would leave feeling pretty frustrated by that. But it was really about red zone chances and not converting. 4 trips into the red zone, 6 total points for BYU in the game. You have to be better than that. And you're not going to beat good teams, of which Kansas definitely qualifies for right now. You're not going to beat good teams if you are consistently doing that. BYU is going to have to figure out something with that offense if they want to win the Big 12. Right? Because that's the conversation here right now. This loss in and of itself to BYU, it definitely hurt the conference, and it would have been nice for BYU in a lot of ways. Maybe you can argue, even if BYU were to win out, this could put in jeopardy a first-round bye. I still don't think it would. I think they would finish in front of Boise if they won out the rest of the way, ran the table, beat Arizona State, beat like a Colorado in the Big 12 title game. But it didn't do all that much damage to BYU's ultimate goals here if they are to get to the playoff and win a Big 12 championship. You still just got to go out there, win your games. You will be totally okay. It hurt the conference. But if the real conversation here about BYU is, can they actually perform well enough? Like, have we seen them throttle down too much to be able to actually win the Big 12? I think that's the conversation. I was starting to have this last week when I brought up the topic, like, is Colorado the best team in the league right now? Hell, I mean, is Arizona State the best team in the league right now? But really, I think Colorado is playing so well with their offense and their defense. It wasn't perfect against Utah, but it certainly is a top half of the league defense. And when you pair that with as elite as that offense is, it's a pretty difficult combo to beat. And we're seeing that. And Colorado seems to be getting better and peaking toward the end of the year here. And it does not feel like that for BYU. It feels like BYU perhaps peaked like around that UCF game and now is starting to tail off a little bit. So that is my question about the Cougars right now. And I think what you would really have to ask yourself. So that's where we stand as far as why that hurts the league, right? BYU loses for all the reasons we just discussed. It greatly, greatly devalues any chance you would have of being a multi-bid league. And the ACC, with the loss of Miami, with Clemson losing a couple of games, it was good for the ACC that SMU found a way to win when they were getting really pushed by Boston College there. But the ACC is still very much in jeopardy of this same scenario here. Can somebody get left out of the playoff? It is possible. I don't think it's likely, but it is possible. And the drumbeat started on this a little bit late last week, where I started to see people bringing up this possibility like, hey, should we be talking about this more? Like, could the Big 12 actually get left out? And maybe even the ACC get left out of this thing? Because everybody just assumes that the Power Four conference champions are going to be fine. Like, I literally had not heard this scenario talked about basically at all until this past week. But it is technically possible. Rules of the college football playoff stipulate the top 5 conference champions are going to get in. The top 4 are going to get byes. It's not, hey, the top power conference champions are going to get in. It's just, it leaves it open-ended. So if there are a group of 5 teams playing well enough, you definitely could be in trouble. Well, right now, Boise is number 12 in the AP. They're number 13 in the college football playoff rankings. So they might move up a spot or two. We shall see. Boise was not, by the way, particularly impressive. I would say over the weekend, they were down 14-0 to San Jose State, but they did come back and win. They continue to win games. They've got the I think BYU fans know full well about now. They've got a quality loss. Boy, does Boise State have a quality loss that people love, losing to Oregon. And because of that, they are in the top 15. Now, Boise's remaining schedule, they're at Wyoming. They've got Oregon State. Those are both games that, like, ESPN's FPI has them at a 95%-ish win probability on. So they will probably win that. It's not going to do them anything in terms of credibility. Then they'll play a Mountain West title game against Colorado State or UNLV. They've already beaten UNLV. If they were to play them again, they have not played Colorado State this year. So if they win out, you're at least going to have a conversation here and sweat it out a bit for the Big 12 as to whether or not you would get a bye. Because if Boise wins out, then they stay in that range. You're going to have to, your champion will have to be ranked higher than them in order to actually get a first round bye there. But the big wild card here really is Army. I suppose maybe you could float Tulane here, but Army, because they have Notre Dame on their schedule. So Tulane's another G5 team that's right behind them in the polls, but Tulane does not have the upward mobility of Army because Army is going to play Notre Dame this week. Army is the threat. Army is the threat here. So Army, number 24 in the playoff rankings, number 18 in the AP poll. Tulane is just a spot and then 2 spots respectively behind them. If Army were to win out, which would mean winning the American title as well as beating Notre Dame, that can be a problem for the Big 12. But I will say, here is a part of the problem because I'm seeing this a lot in the chat. I'm going to go, and I see you guys with the super chats. I will get there in just a moment. But I see Keep Chopping really pushing this. Army just needs to win and the Big 12 is out. Keep Chopping, I regret to inform you, if that happens and Army beats Notre Dame and Army wins out, and BYU or Colorado, one of those 2 teams wins out from here, then that will absolutely not happen. Army is not going to be jumping Colorado or BYU in that scenario. What would have to happen is that Army wins out, and then the Big 12 has a real disaster scenario of itself on its hands where you have a 3-loss team win the league, which could happen if there is enough chaos. And we're staring down this week being what will probably tell us the answer to that, because you've got a difficult game for Colorado against Kansas, which the early line on that was 1.5, Colorado minus 1.5 at Arrowhead. And then you've got BYU going on the road as an underdog, rightfully so, in my opinion right now, at Arizona State. So it's not that it can't happen, but those things would have to happen. So pushing a narrative that, hey, all Army has to do is win out, which, by the way, includes beating Notre Dame, right? So, flippantly throwing that out there like that is something that is likely to happen is not the accurate way to be doing that. But it would also take the Big 12 bringing too much chaos upon itself as well. So you could have 2 conference champions potentially if you get a chaos Big 12 scenario, if it's 3-loss Iowa State, 3-loss K-State somehow, whoever it's going to be from that group, and they win the Big 12, then you could see that team not being ranked as high as an Army that continues to win and has a win over Notre Dame in its back pocket. That would be your nightmare scenario. Again, with Tulane, I put them out there, but I don't think that Tulane has the upward mobility that would get everybody's attention enough to boost them up the polls. The Big 12 is fortunate in that regard, especially with how well Tulane is playing right now, that Tulane did not beat K-State, which came down to the last possession of the game, or did not beat Oklahoma, which came down to late in the fourth quarter. They were right there with a chance to win in Norman. So those games, you flip one of those, and suddenly Tulane would be a much, much bigger threat here. So again, I think if BYU wins out and wins the Big 12 championship, you're obviously not going to have any sort of issue here. On the other hand, if Colorado wins out, don't think you're going to have any sort of issue here. Colorado, number 17 in the playoff rankings last week. If you want to say Colorado wins out, would they jump Boise? We can have that conversation. I think they would, though, because that would include another couple of wins here where they'll probably start inching their way up a bit. And then you would presume that it would be a decent quality win that they would have in the Big 12 championship game. So I'm not too worried about either of those scenarios. The problem will be if you're going to get a loss for Colorado, you're going to get a loss for BYU, and that throws everything into a little bit of chaos as far as who's making the Big 12 title game, and you somehow have a 3-loss Big 12 team winning it, which is definitely still possible. Definitely still possible. That would be the scenario that's not good. Included in that, I did see like Max Olson tweeted out, I believe with ESPN now, formerly of The Athletic. Max Olson tweeted out like that there is a scenario out there that would involve K-State and Baylor meeting for the Big 12 championship in like an 8-way tie. So there is still craziness that is out there, if you can believe it. There's also the ACC here. So the ACC, if you have 3-loss SMU, for instance, winning the ACC title, that could be problematic. That would require a loss coming up for SMU, which I don't foresee as overly likely, but they play teams that are plucky enough. It's Virginia and Cal. I mean, you could ask Miami about just how difficult it can be to make sure that you handle Cal. They probably should have lost that game. And then if that had happened, the ACC would be in real trouble right now. Then you could be looking at what happens if just Miami makes it through and then beats SMU in the conference championship game. And you've got all these teams with 2 losses. Probably not being jumped by any sort of Army scenario there if you're the ACC, but certainly in danger of losing your auto bye in that first round. Miami also has to go play at Syracuse in the regular season finale. And like Syracuse all of a sudden is 7-3. That becomes a difficult spot for a Miami team that has struggled with almost anybody with a pulse in the ACC and has done a bit of a BYU act of their own throughout the year. So those are ways the ACC could start to get in trouble too if you have Miami and SMU picking up losses before this Big 12 or rather ACC championship game. So that's kind of the rundown right now.